I came across the story of Johnny Smythe less than a year ago. I found the entry in Imperial War Museum, in Bomber Command Museum, big entry in Wikipedia, where it actually says in Wikipedia that Johnny Smythe is buried in St Mary's churchyard here in Tame. But there's nothing here in Tame about him. I thought, we need to do something about this. So I then discovered that Eddie Smythe, his son, lives close by and has done for many, many years. And it was really easy to track him down, actually, because he's well known in this area as a philanthropist. He's a mean squash player, I would say. And with Eddie's help and the brilliant help of the volunteers here at Tame Museum, we've got a really nice exhibit which you're going to be going to see in a couple of minutes. But before that, what I wanted to do was to hand over to a man who was born in Jamaica, came to the UK with £6 in his pocket, went on to become a really highly successful businessman. But today he's here in his capacity as the lead ambassador for a National Windrush Museum. So please give a warm welcome to Levi Root.
I'm so happy to be here finally. I got a little bit flustered when I couldn't find the museum, and I stopped twice asking my way in. But we're here to talk about heroes, you know. I've been fortunate, you know, as His Excellency mentioned, to be involved in the National Windrush Museum. And we are, in this point, looking to collect our heroes. We are to collect super people that was very beneficial to this country. The name John Smythe should be respected and distinguished, not only in the 1 month of the year when Black history is remembered, but his name and story should and must command and be recalled whenever time we celebrate those brave, heroic men and women whose endeavors had helped to make this country the Great Britain which it is today. John Smythe was a war hero, born on the island of Sierra Leone and one of the first black RAF fighter pilots. He was also a Windrush veteran and pioneer, and without him, the Afro-Caribbean story would be quite different to what it is. And I, and thousands of others, probably wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for this great man. His actions changed the course of modern British history. It was he, as a senior officer, while traveling on the MV Empire Windrush, returning to the Caribbean after fighting in World War II. He made the suggestion to the UK's colonial office after witnessing huge unemployment, particularly in Jamaica, when he made the call that the returning servicemen should be given the chance to return back to England to seek employment, helping to rebuild the country after the devastation of Hitler's Luftwaffe. The ship left Jamaica on the 24th of May and arrived at Tilbury Docks on the 22nd of June in the year of 1948. So the Windrush Generation is, in part, because of the actions of one man, John Smythe, and this is why he is my hero. The search for a deeper understanding of our communities and their historic, artistic values, knowledge and understanding. That is the reasons why this alliance with the Royal Maritime Greenwich has been forged. We should all endeavor for our children to know of their heritage, and for that, our responsibilities must be in the research, exhibition, conservation, collection of our history for educational purposes. We must update the narratives about Black history. They shouldn't always revert back to slavery, which is the most uninspiring part of our dynamic history. But there is much more to us than that amongst those pages of history. The National Windrush Museum will tell a different story of an heroic set of special people, the Windrush pioneers, who brought their hard work and entrepreneurialism and helped to build this small island. It was immigrants. They were the ones who put the great into Great Britain. Our aim here is to decolonize the very idea of museums and to challenge the current narratives of exhibiting and promoting a much more inclusive representation of this country's history and the parts that black people played in it. Our Windrush pioneers' role in literature, medicine, law, science, politics, and the military, all has gone silently under the bridge for far too long. The significant contribution that the Windrush pioneers has made to our societies, both in the UK and throughout the diaspora, must be recognized, preserved, exhibited in a museum about them. And not just a footnote to be mentioned only when Black History Month comes around. There is a need for us to tell our own story and not always to allow others to do it for us, because we are aiming to tell the story of Great Britain. That was absolutely incredible. It's an incredible story, and as I said, one that needs to be told. Yeah. I think especially for young people, inspiration is the key thing that we're always missing. Something to inspire us. But can you tell us, in your thoughts, what do you think it was about the man that allowed him to do what he did, to come out of himself and did something which was heroic and historical, but still kept it within on the inside? Can you give us a little thoughts about how he was?
Sure. I think he had a great sense of right and wrong. He had a great sense of justice. So when war broke out in Europe, he was very well aware of the threat that the Nazis gave to the world, to the whole world. He knew they were prosecuting different groups, different ethnic groups, and he knew they had to be stopped. And he would do what thousands of men and women did, which is to step up and be counted. He had no hesitation in volunteering and coming over to England to join the war. And I think if you follow his progression in life, he always had this belief that people who needed to be defended should be defended. Now, you mentioned the Windrush. So I was fortunate last year to get in contact with the last remaining person alive who was on the Windrush going out to the Caribbean. So everyone tends to know the story about the Windrush coming to Britain, but very little is known about the ship going out. So he was a senior officer on board, taking this large contingent of demobilized men back home. So I went to meet this gentleman. His name is Charles Ottey. He turned 100 in February. He was an ARAF himself. And I wanted to talk to him because I wanted to see if he could corroborate the stories and tell me about the trip, because there's no one else to do it, and there's nothing online. And he lives in Boston in Lincolnshire, and I went up and met him. I introduced myself, told him who I was, and immediately he said, "Oh, your father, John Smythe, he was our senior officer on board the ship." And he started to tell me about things that went on the ship. But there was an added bonus to this. He said, when I was stationed in a barracks in Lincoln, there was one night where 3 men snuck out of the camp and they went to a nightclub to party. They got set upon by a group of racist thugs. And they got into a big fight. And these men were court-martialed. And he said, your father picked that story up whilst he was with Culloden office, and he immediately stepped up and he defended them in the court-martial, and he got them off. Not only could he tell me that there were 3 men, but he knew the names of these 3 men. You know, age 99, when I was talking to him last day, he said, these are the 3 men. He said he stepped up and he defended them because they needed defending. And of course, you know, we talked about the Windrush arriving in Jamaica. And you can imagine how difficult it was for a large group of young men who had left their home, come over to Britain to fight in the war. They've been demobilized, and they've gone on this ship, and they're now in port in Jamaica, so they can smell their country. They can sort of taste it. They're within touching distance, only to find out that the country's saying, well, we just haven't got the jobs to offer you. I mean, that's a difficult position for these men. And my father was able to step up. He was able to talk to them and say, look, it's going to be difficult. You know, in Britain, it won't be easy. Even getting accommodation at that particular time would be hard. But there was an opportunity. And he was effectively the mouthpiece for these young men. And he would make the right decision, and that ship would come back. And he would say he didn't do this to write history. He did it because it was the right thing to do, and he was the person to do the job at that time. So there's no surprise that as his career progressed, he became a barrister and a lawyer. And throughout his life, in many, many occasions, he would be defending those who needed to be defended. He knew right from wrong, and he had a strong sense of justice, and that's what John and I grew up with.
Yeah, well, I refer to your father as a hero, but we know heroes in real terms come in real life wearing capes or big chest or whatever. So can I ask you, what was your father like? Was he a quiet man? What was he, gargantuous as someone that did all that he did, fought in the war, shot down planes and that? Give us a sort of picture.
A sense of the man.
Yeah. What the man
Well, as I said, he never talked about the war. You know, the war for him, once he went back to Sierra Leone, was a closed chapter of his life. He threw out his uniform, his logbook, all memorabilia to do with the RAF. It was closed book. You know, I do understand now that he obviously had some demons in there, you know. And as I said, when I was in Germany last year, I found out a lot more about some experiences he went through. So you understand why he didn't talk about it. But as a lawyer, I was incredibly charismatic man. He was very tall, he was very charming. Everyone loved him. He was quite Victorian, because, you know, the Creoles of Sierra Leone, we are Creoles, we're descendants of the slave trade, and they modelled themselves upon the Victorian British. So he was very Victorian. He loved his family intensely, but his focus was always on work, always doing the things which we talked about, defending those that needed defending. But he was a very loving father.
And as we are in Black History Month, now, and as I was saying, that I think it's most important for the young people. I think, as Marcus Garvey says, the people without the knowledge of his past is like a tree without root. Our history is only now just beginning to be told. What is your thoughts on Black history, and what do you think your father's story could add to young people's going forward?
Well, I think it's very important that stories like my dad are told, particularly to the younger generation. So I very regularly go into schools, to colleges. I go to lots of different institutions, the RAF, police, British Legion, etc. And I tell that story continuously to schools all over the country. And children generally are fascinated. I show them pictures of this tall black man in an RAF officer's uniform and standing in front of planes. And they're going, wow, we didn't know that there were men like this in the war. But they want to hear about the story. That's what I get. And after talking, I get letters from the children. And the teachers ask me to come back and do more. And it gets busier and busier. So there's there's sort of gravity to the story now. And I think it's important, as I said, not only his story, but lots of other stories that are similar are told to the schools, particularly to the younger generation, but to everyone who has an interest.
Thank you very much. Give a round of applause.
Thank you. Give an opportunity for you to ask any questions if you'd like to. What I just wanted to mention, because there was a work camp, wasn't there, down the road, and when the prisoner of war camp was liberated by the Russians, did they not call upon your father to help them?
Yeah, well, that's a story that's in the book, and it's a story that no one knew about because he never talked about it. But there was a concentration camp next to the prisoner of war camp. Now, the concentration camp is exactly as you would have pictured a concentration camp to be. You know, striped pyjamas, the people starving to death, that sort of place. And my father, the doctor we'd worked with, there was a retired dentist and an American who could speak Russian and German. So there's a group of 4. They went to the concentration camp to see if they could give any help to the people there. It's difficult. I can't say too much because they're children here. You can only imagine that the sights that they saw, the dead and the dying, and the conditions that they were in. And interestingly, that Scottish doctor, when he went back to Scotland, he spent years doing tours and talking about his experiences. He also never spoke about that one, because I'm in touch with his daughter who lives in Ireland. She hadn't heard that story, but it's there, it's memorized in a book, that they went through that experience. So you can only imagine the sights that they saw, and it made me understand why he never ever talked about it.
When they showed the burial ground, so I'd just like to know why your dad wanted to be buried in this country. People of African heritage like to be buried back home. He fought for Britain, and he also fought for the independence of Sierra Leone. Why would he like to be buried in Tame?
Yeah, it's a good question, Amanda. Quite a few people have wondered that. And so have we from time to time. Because after he died, we got contacted by the Sierra Leonean government, who wanted him flown back for a state funeral. Well, we only found out after he died, he'd already been down to the Co-op on the high street and made the arrangements himself for his funeral. He'd done it himself. And I mean, Britain to him was the motherland. So even after the war, when he worked in Sierra Leone, every year he came to Britain on holiday. It was just, you know, home from home. And of course, there's this indelible link between the Creoles, the descendants of the slaves, and Britain. So not necessarily the whole of Sierra Leone, just the Creoles, which is less than 2% of the population, so 200,000 in the whole world. And there was this link between them and Britain. And that was very strong in my father. And I think that was further fortified being in the RAF during the war. He was happy living here. You know, we were living there. John's here and Carol, I'm living there. And this became his home. And even though it was only 5 or 6 years, this was his home. And he thought, no, I want to be buried right here. This is going to be my home. This is where I'm going to be put to rest.